What's up, all you real beast? Magic Pat here, and I got a couple of little things I want to show you. So this is just going to be a quick video, and I'm going to be talking about what we used in Keaton Beach and what we continue to use down there, plus, you know, some other places. So yeah, let's get right to it. So anyway, one of the things that I wanted to show you was the rigs that we use down there in Keaton Beach when we catch our speckled trout, our ladyfish, bluefish, Spanish mackerel, basically everything that you see in our videos that we catch. So there's 3 different rigs that we use while we're down there. Of course, I'm going to go ahead and start with the one that probably everybody has seen and knows about. You got right here a popping cork setup. I got little tag ends on here still because I'm just showing you guys, so I'm not really trying to clean it up and make it look good. But basically, you have this plastic cork right here, or this one's actually foam. It's got a metal rod through it. It's got beads on the top, and it's got brass beads on the bottom. So if you don't know anything about these kind of corks right here, the whole point is whenever you pop them in the water like you would a top water plug for bass, they make that clacking sound, and that sound plus the water splashing from the cup on this the cork right here, it makes a sound really similar to the speckled trout when they're eating. They make a weird, it's kind of a weird metallic popping sound whenever they're attacking something on the surface, and this mimics it. So you get that really good pop. It brings the fish in. They come in looking for food. And so you have a leader underneath the cork. So this, of course, this is really short, but a couple of the places we fished at down there were so shallow, we actually used a setup about this short. Just because the grass sticks 2 foot up off the bottom, you want to keep your bait basically right above the grass. They come up out of it and they attack it. So normally, though, you have leader line here, which we use 15 and 20 pound fluorocarbon, and we use about 2 to 3 feet of it most of the time. There were a couple of times where we used 5 feet, which makes it really hard to cast, but I mean, you do what you got to whenever you're trying to get to the fish. So, and then it goes down to, we used a basic J hook run through the shrimp. This lure right here is a good example, because this is exactly how we do it. We run the hook down the back. It comes out near the tail. And it makes it a lot harder for the fish to steal the shrimp. Plus, it makes it easier to get them on the hook. A lot of times you see people, they just wrap a shrimp around the hook and they don't get very many fish. You do it this way, you start catching a lot more. And so basically, you throw it out there and you pop it. So it pops. It pulls the shrimp forward, and then it kind of just swings down underneath it. It looks like a shrimp kind of trying to lay to the bottom. And that's usually whenever we would get our bites on this. After you pause for a couple of seconds, you would go to reel back up, and there'd be a fish. You didn't even feel him, you know. He was just there. So that's a pretty good setup. I like that setup. The only problem is, like you'll see in this clip right here, the boat that we were in is a very small boat. It's about 15, 16 foot long. When you have 3 people throwing popping corks with 4 foot leaders, it can get dangerous really quick. There were several times when the rod came real close to people's face. You have to really be on your A game and watch out for what you're doing. Now, a couple of the other rigs that I used, it's a different variation of the same thing. I'm going to start with the basic one. So you saw on my bait caster setup, I was throwing a gulp shrimp. I was using a plastic bait, basically. I was using a J hook or a jig setup. So you see right here, I got a jig head, and it's just a curlicue worm right here. Just pretend it's a shrimp, because basically it's the same thing. You would do just like this one right here. You would thread the hook up through the back of the shrimp. Now, the good thing about this, there's no pause. Like, you don't have to worry about a fish being on there and you missing the bite. You're in contact with the bait the entire time. So you throw it out there, You're basically letting it sink to the bottom. It sinks quick, and then you pop it back up, and you just constantly keep it moving. And it looks like a shrimp trying to run for its life, basically. Drives them nuts. You get a lot of really aggressive hits. Like, you just feel the rod just boom. Like, there's no doubt that you have a bite. Problem with this setup is it goes down into the grass, so you have to constantly time it almost to where you're getting it to where it just barely ticks the top of the grass. If it sinks down even for a second, there's a couple of times where I mistimed it, or the grass might have been a little taller in that area, and I literally broke off some of my jig heads because the grass was so tough. That seaweed is no joke, especially if you get a ball of it on your line. You are not getting your hook back. And if you do, a lot of times it causes such a commotion that it spooks the fish in the area. This is a very fun setup. I caught a couple of the speckled trout on it. I caught some ladyfish on it. I actually caught one Spanish on it, which that was fun. I like this setup, but this last trip, this really wasn't what was catching the fish, and neither was the popping cork. The popping cork usually does good, and it still did good on this trip, but what actually worked out for me the most was same thing. So same exact thing, took the shrimp same way. Difference is I had no weight on this one. This setup was just a fluorocarbon leader. I even had to use a steel leader because a couple of times the Spanish were biting the hook off. So I would put a steel leader on, believe it or not, and was still catching speckled trout. But I used a very thick gauge hook. This is actually one of the hooks that we used while we were out there. That's way overkill usually for speckled trout, but I like to horse the fish in as best as possible. If you can get a fish to the boat, usually the quicker you get it in, the better chance you have of keeping the fish. So with a thicker hook, you don't have to worry about it bending out. But same thing, ran the hook through the back of the shrimp and come out by the tail. And I would cast this out because this is so light that like a natural shrimp or a gulp shrimp, like I was using gulp, it sinks like a natural bait. So you throw it out there, it hits the water, and it just slowly goes towards the bottom. And when the setup is like this, because it's so light, you could actually feel when it was getting close to the grass or getting in the grass. You could pop it, and the weight isn't holding it down into the grass. It would just glide right back out of the grass. You could actually let it sit down into the grass a little bit, and a lot of times it would come right back out without getting hung up. And this is what I caught most of my fish on. I got into a bunch of speckled trout with this, ladyfish, got into a bunch of the Spanish mackerel. The Spanish loved this setup. Just a natural presentation of a shrimp trying to run. Yeah, it worked out really well for me. Of course, this one has problems too. This setup is really, really light. It's hard to cast this. Where the popping cork, you could throw it basically as far as you want to. And the jig head, you can cast, even further than the popping cork. This one, you could not cast far. The furthest I could do was maybe 20 yards with this. If I was casting with the wind. Against the wind, I was only doing about 10 yards. Luckily for me, most of the fish were biting close to the boat with this setup. I didn't have to really worry about missing too many fish because they were in close. I didn't have to go out super far. Most of my fish this trip were caught really close to the boat, which is, kind of weird. Usually you want to get further away from the boat because the fish are not as scared. They don't see the boat. They don't get as spooked. But this time they didn't even care the boat was there. There were several times we caught the fish literally as we picked the bait out of the water. So yeah, these are three simple setups. They each have their pluses and their minuses. You got popping cork, makes noise, attracts fish, but it gets tangled up. And if the leader's too long, it's hard to cast. Jig hook, cast really far, can work the bait aggressive, get aggressive bites, but it sinks down into the grass and you can get broke off on the grass. And then you had just the regular J hook, no weight through a shrimp. It's natural presentation, sank slow, caught more fish, but can't cast as far. So that is basically it. You had to choose what worked for you, and in this trip, the natural presentation worked the best for me. It may not always be that way, but for most of the trip, that's when I caught my good fish on. I even lost probably the biggest fish that I hooked the whole trip. The very last, basically last cast of the whole trip was on this setup. So that's it. If you ever get a chance to go to Keaton Beach like we did, or go down to Panama City, or anywhere in Florida or Louisiana where there's speckled trout and redfish, all of these will work good. It just depends on what is best for the area you're in. So yeah, get out there, give it a try. Go catch the biggest fish of your life. You'll be glad you actually took more than just one setup with you. So anyway, it's Magic Pat signing out. I got to get ready. We're going on a trip tomorrow after work, going to fish with Joe from Chat Cats again. Going to try to go catch some big catfish, go big or go home. So I'll see you back out on the water. Peace.